Oh boy, get ready for a spicy video. This will probably be a controversial one. Before I start, no, I am not some blind defender of China. In fact, I'm just the opposite, and I have many grievances that could be discussed at a later point. This video is just meant to provide more nuance to the conversation. With that said, let's start. Logically, as rational people, we should carry out an investigation of all the facts before we arrive at our conclusions, let alone carry out any action. This applies a lot to everyday life, and even more so to politics. When it comes to political actions, a staple is protesting. A protest can either be channeled into a specific goal, or used to make general discontent heard. Now, it shouldn't be controversial to say that not every protest deserves support. A prime example of this is the Hong Kong protests. Now, if you have some affinity for that movement, just wait and listen to what I have to say. First things first, generally, internet support really doesn't amount to much. Changing a profile picture or retweeting a hashtag or a nauseating amount of Reddit posts can neither benefit nor hurt the course or outcome of any protests, for the most part. Usually, Western governments have made up their mind long before everyday people start expressing their own opinions, because in some cases, such as Hong Kong, they had a direct hand in what's going on. You supporting them by word, or not, really doesn't matter. But more to the point, let's talk about what has happened. Lots of people in the West seem to think that this is about freedom, democracy, police brutality, etc., all things that need to be defined, but we'll leave that for later. The entire thing started because of a bill known as the Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Bill. I know it's a mouthful. This bill became a thing because in 2018, a pregnant woman was murdered by her boyfriend in Taiwan, who then fled to Hong Kong. Since there was no extradition bill between Hong Kong and Taiwan, he couldn't be extradited. Despite the fact that Hong Kong is part of China, under the one country two systems setup, Hong Kong still maintains its own extradition treaties with other nations. The argument from the other side was that this amendment to existing extradition law will impede upon Hong Kong's legal system and rid them of their autonomy, which is hilariously stupid. The law only affects the system in one way. Right now, in order to carry out extradition, there has to be a treaty. Under this bill, however, the chief executive would be given the power to begin the process of extradition on a case-by-case basis in the case of countries seeking extradition where there is no formal treaty. It's a simple law meant to ease judicial matters, and with the appropriate context in mind, it honestly is a legitimate thing to bring about. This is about bringing a murderer to justice for the death of a young woman and her unborn child, not quote-unquote freedom. The people making this out to be about democracy are either CIA shills, ignorant, or, to use the scientific term, full of shit. During the colonial era of Hong Kong, when the British controlled practically everything, there were no elections from 1843 until 1985. Yes, 1985. Britain simply appointed governors at will. Very democratic. Afterwards, only when the handover process to China begun, did very limited elections take place. Only in 1995 did they have a legislative council that was entirely democratically elected. After being rightfully returned to China, Hong Kong became even more democratic as the People's Republic of China added more seats both directly elected and in the so-called functional constituencies that represent subsets of the population in a type of electoral college. Secondly, I think it's interesting just how much traction the Hong Kong protests got, despite the fact that there are way bigger protests going on around the world, with actual real instances of horrific state repression and murder of protesters. The protests in Iraq have over 100 dead in just a few weeks. The protests in Chile in just 2 weeks have 20 dead. The protests in Hong Kong, which have been going on since June, 0 dead. Not a soul. In fact, the amount of restraint the police in Hong Kong have shown is amazing, especially compared to my own country, Iraq, where I can't even leave work without being harassed by cops, or in Chile, where they're cracking skulls by the hour. Now, before the argument is brought up, no, I am not defending police. In fact, I think the institution should be abolished. But remember that the image being shown to both you and I is one of extreme state repression in Hong Kong, where there really isn't any. Regardless, back on point. Why are the Hong Kong protesters getting so much traction, especially on English-speaking mediums, and Western government support compared to the protests in Iraq, or Lebanon, or Chile, etc.? You and I both know that if the United States is supporting something, then there's probably something rotten. If they've ever really cared for democracy, they would have never overthrown Salvador Allende, the democratically elected leader of Chile, and put a fascist dictator in his place. Anyhow, let's take a deeper look. The main organizers are the Civil Human Rights Frontier, a coalition made up of some 48 pro-democracy, and I use that term very loosely, NGOs and political groups. Unsurprisingly, many of them are American-backed groups used to further American interests in the region. Again, if there's American money around, then there's something foul. This shouldn't be a controversial statement. If you're okay with American money directly funding these groups for some weird reason, then imagine protests in the US being directly backed by Russian and Chinese money. Then imagine them waving Chinese flags around. Then imagine these protest organizers and leaders meeting Chinese political officials. Then imagine them asking Xi Jinping to militarily intervene in the United States. All of a sudden, the need for nuance begins to make a lot more sense, doesn't it? Also, an interesting side note, putting aside the horribly inflated numbers for protest attendees, some people are being paid to show up to the protests. Another thing conveniently left out of the official narrative is how many in Hong Kong actually support the extradition bill. 60% of the population doesn't support independence for Hong Kong at all. Many people are very unhappy with the protests, the large-scale rioting and destruction of public property going on that honestly serves no purpose other than to look pretty for Western cameras. They're not waving around American flags, writing signs in English, and singing the US anthem for fun. They're doing it because they know it'll get attention from English-speaking Westerners and Western media. As for those waving around British colonial flags, they're just conveniently ignoring their own history in vain hope that they'll get some more support from the West. They forget how, during the colonial period, laws were passed to ensure that no Chinese would live in the most desirable areas of Hong Kong, which the British wished to preserve as their exclusive enclaves. They forget how in a land in which 98% of the population was Chinese, English was the official language. The Chinese language was not permitted to be used in government offices. Laws regulating conduct were written exclusively in English, a language which the vast majority of the population could not understand. They forget the 1967 protests in Hong Kong, where the British massacred dozens of people and imprisoned thousands. Another untrue thing that's being thrown around is that China is censoring news about Hong Kong, which is such nonsense it's unbelievable. Just take a look at Reddit, where pro-Hong Kong posts get hundreds of thousands of upvotes on practically every subreddit. If there really was censorship, you wouldn't be seeing any of that. I get it, a lot of people are just karma farming because they love meaningless internet points, but I'm sure an equal percentage actually believes that A, China is really censoring Reddit, it isn't, and B, that they're doing something that can impact the protests in any way, they aren't. The worst thing, I think, is the rampant racism that has come out of protesters and people in the West. I hope you're aware of how disgustingly racist some people in Hong Kong are towards mainlanders. Just speaking Mandarin will get you worse service, numerous racist remarks, and, within the current protest climate, beat up or worse. When the basketball player LeBron James made some very fair comments about the issue, some Hong Kong protesters started chanting the N-word in relation to him, calling him monkey, etc., just generally very unpleasant and reactionary things. The worst of it is the sheer amount of xenophobia coming out of many people in the West. Take a look at any comment section under a pro-Hong Kong post and you'll see what I mean. Now, speaking solely to the leftists watching this video, I get it. It's really nice to see masses of people out protesting what is being portrayed as a tyrannical government. The thing is, though, many people are being duped. The protests are anything but honorable and support-worthy. The aesthetics of a revolutionary movement are beautiful, but in this case, they're just that, aesthetics, with no content. There are genuine protests fighting austerity and fascist police going on right now in the world, such as Chile. But that gets no media coverage, no hashtag, no massive waves of support on English websites, no US senator support, nothing. Think about things critically. Which protest is more damaging to the system the United States props up? Which protest is getting all the media coverage? Again, because I know I need to repeat myself on this does not mean I'm some CCP shill, although I wish I was, goddamn, I need to pay my tuition fees. Nor does this mean that I support China in particular. Frankly, I've yet to make up my mind. As the great helmsman said, no investigation, no right to speak. And I don't think I've done enough research on China's political and economic system to make up my mind just yet. What I am saying is approach everything with a critical mind. Usually, if the US supports it, it's probably shit. Upon research, you find this to be true. Apply this to history, and you'll see that it's correct practically 100% of the time. I've included some great resources in the pinned comment that you should take a look at if you genuinely care about the truth of the matter and other incorrect general anti-China stuff. If you enjoy what I do, then please support me on Patreon. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to Sasha Navaseta, Zarian Arsin, Shayan Zhang, Larry Valdemar Miniilo, Khan, Daryl McFarlane, Ring, Andy Haywood, Eli Girzon, Faustin, Henry Ashurst, Industrial Robot, Ray Hogginson, Tristan Druian, Ren Kale Blancaster, Libertarian Stalinist, Ahmad Abdul-Jabbar, Wes Franklin, Manda, Daniel William, Mia Nakano, Liam Sabanan, Connor O'Reilly, at Democracy Expert, Brandon Ruffing, Adam Traby, Jedi Davion, Nutringheim Lunde, Matt Smith, Mikar Gropoulos, Baz, Peter Coffin, Zatarani, Comrade Pengu, and of course Charles. Thank you, Charles. I'll see you in the next one.